Let's go ahead and go live. Tell me when. We're live. Hey everybody, this is Brent from CANIS Foundation. Thank you guys so much for joining us again. This is our last week of our free dog training workshops for you guys. And as promised last week, this week is all about leadership and leadership skills and kind of what it all means in dog training, right? I think it's really interesting to kind of see kind of the evolution of thought when it comes to our dogs. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But before we get into that, I really want to thank you guys for joining us every single week, for helping us out and making donations to help us with our nonprofit. We are creating a budget now for 2021, so I want to thank you guys so much. If any of you guys have found value in this, please look back at the other 3 videos that we had and just share them with your friends. Share. And hopefully we can help people across the United States. And I know I have a dog trainers podcast, and it's really great when something's on the internet. You can help people in Asia, in Australia, in India, in Europe, and all these different countries. So if you guys know anybody who could benefit from some of this stuff, just please share it. Again, thank you guys so much for all your support so far. So let's touch back on what the subject matter of today is, and I want you guys to really get all of your questions ready. Those of you guys who might just be joining in the first time, this is our leadership episode, and those of you guys who have been checking in or are my clients prior, I think leadership is a very complex concept to really understand because it changes from dog to dog, and leadership is a little bit of a moving target because as our dogs evolve and as our dogs get older and as our lifestyles change, as the amount of time we have to spend with our dogs, the style of leadership ultimately has to change. Now also we can look at leadership kind of as parenting. So I want you guys to get your questions locked and loaded. We're going to do a lot of Q&As back and forth in between some lecture. And so we're excited to get started, all right? It's really cool because doing research in dog training, you get to see kind of what the mentality was of dogs throughout history, right? And we start seeing, like, even in my own lifetime, right, from the 80s to now, there's been a huge shift in the perception of dogs, what dogs do, are they our family, or do they live outside, do they sleep in bed with us, are they allowed on the couch, not allowed, are they animals, are they our babies? Like, there's such a huge evolution of thought that has existed in dogs. And I think it's this very quick evolution that has kind of been very confusing for society to kind of catch up to, right? And so when discussing dog leadership, it's always really important to understand what kind of owner style we have, right? And to understand what kind of expectations we have from our dog, because sometimes, we might have habits that we learned from our childhood, maybe mimicking our parents when we were younger, maybe certain management styles of our dogs that we were mimicking when we were younger, that no longer fit the lifestyle we live today as adults, right? And I think a very common story that we hear is, there's going to be certain, I guess, ignorances to, sometimes the only experience we have with dogs was dogs as kids. And so what tends to happen is we remember what we did as kids. We rubbed their bellies, we played with them, we gave them kisses. We did a number of these easy things. We just showed them lots of love, and these dogs grew up to be, in our eyes, perfect, right? And so as adults, we come to the very, very fast reality that loving your dog is not enough sometimes, right? Parenting your dog is a very crucial part of raising any creature with a brain, especially a creature with a brain that we want to be a huge part of our lives. Now, to what extent you want your dog to be a huge part of your lives is completely up to you guys. But I want to kind of go over a little bit of the thought process that has changed over the last couple years, or over the last 30 years. I think prior to modern age of thinking, dogs were kind of looked at as creatures, as beasts, right? As something that you kept outside, something that, you had to feed them here and there. But for the most part, they didn't have as much emotional gravity as they do now, right? And there are even still countries that exist, third world countries, second world countries, that the dogs are still perceived that way, right? And so, different levels and mindsets of compassion and accountability all kind of change, right? Back then, to put it briefly, is if the dog was bad, it was just bad stock. It was a bad dog. The dog just wasn't going to cut it, So usually what happened back then is we blamed the dogs. And when we blamed dogs, it was really easy to say, oh, that's a bad bloodline, or that dog's not good for kids, or that dog's not good at his job. So unfortunately, what they did back then is they just killed dogs. And what's interesting is we see some of these old school mentalities that kind of still exist in certain sciences around dogs, right? So pretty much the basic thought of it is, if the dog is innately aggressive, assertive, reactive, fearful, whatever it might be, that dog may not be worth raising, right? Which is really, really sad to think about that. That's how our grandparents used to think, right, when it came to dogs. And so we've kind of seen this pointing the finger at the dog's genetics, at the dog's genetic roll of the dice. We've kind of seen this transformation over the last 30 years. And funny enough, we kind of owe this transformation to a guy named Cesar Millan. If you guys know who Cesar Millan is, the dog whisperer. Back in the early 90s when he actually came out with a show, he was one of the first dog professionals that had such a big audience on him that actually pointed the finger not at the dog or the genetics, but he pointed the finger at the people raising them, which is the humans, right? And so this idea of leadership, this idea of how we spoil dogs and how we teach dogs really confusing messages, and how a lot of the accountability and liabilities are pretty much on the human, right? And this is kind of the age and era that we live in nowadays as dog owners, right? We know that there are things that we're doing wrong. We know that there are things we could be doing better, or that we might do inconsistently. And so it's really, even though we know it, it's really hard for us to fit in our parenting on top of our jobs, on top of our relationships, on top of our hobbies, on top of all those things. And so it becomes a little bit tricky. And as a dog trainer, the whole purpose of this foundation is if we could teach people to be better leaders and parents to their dogs, we would see more groups of dogs that can actually fit in a home lifestyle, right? We wouldn't see so many dogs in shelters. We wouldn't see so many dogs being euthanized. We wouldn't see so many dogs in rescues that just keep getting rehomed and rehomed and rehomed perpetually because they just don't know how to behave or don't know how to act, or we don't have people who have enough emotional intelligence or understanding of technique or understanding how to lead an animal who needs help. We don't have enough of them. So there's a lot of dogs who the end result just becomes euthanasia. So this is a really important subject matter to my heart. So I really want to share it with you guys. And if you guys have any questions, just shoot them out, and Christiana will read them back to me. But until we see some questions, I'm just going to lecture, and hopefully you guys learn something. So even as dog trainers, right? Dog trainers are practitioners. I would be silly to ever assume that I am the best leader of my own dog, of my staff, of anyone who's under my charge, right? It'd be silly. However, every day I try to do better, right? And even with my own dogs, even though my dog is super obedient and he's super loving and he's super well socialized and he has really good genetics and he does all of those things, sometimes when we have really good dogs, what tends to happen is we don't feel like we have to raise them so much, right? And it isn't until our dogs start barking, lunging, growling, biting things, attacking things that we go, oh, something is wrong, right? And so part of leadership, I will pat myself on the back to know that with my own dog, Black Dynamite, I did a really good job socializing him and teaching him what I expect from him, developing communication systems, developing all those things. But there was a time in my life, especially in my career, where my staff would spend a lot of time with him, take care of the dogs. And in my mind, I felt, okay, he's getting played with, he's getting walked, he's getting taken care of. I'm checking off all the boxes of what a good dog parent's supposed to do. And what I realized is the more busy I would get with work, the more lack of attention I would give him, the more his behavior started shifting, right? And this is how I know leadership to really be a true concept in dog training, because as soon as the father figure, me, when I stepped away from actually raising him, or being there to guide his behavior or teaching him what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, this is all of a sudden when we started seeing barking for the first time. This is all of a sudden where I started seeing a dog get very protective, a dog show attitude towards another dog who he's never done before in his life. And so, you know, it was a big wake-up call even for me as a trainer to be able to say like, oh, hey, you know, something's going on with the dog, and the only finger I could point was at me, right? And so it really motivates me to share certain things with you. I guess the only difference between you and I is how many dogs I've trained, and the only difference is I know how to seek out and check out what areas of leadership I might be failing my dog on, right? And so I want to share this information with you guys and give you guys hopefully some type of template to be able to get to know maybe where we could be doing better when it comes to leadership, because it is very complex concepts, especially when we start getting into the each and every variable that could lead to a potential problem from your dog. But let's go ahead and we're going to put up a little diagram real quick to kind of show you guys. If you can show the layers of leadership for me. Hello, hello. Sorry guys, can you hear me now? Okay, my mistake. There was an issue. All right, so I assume you guys heard none of what I was talking about. So that's okay, I think we're back now. Cool, so let's go over this again from the very, very beginning. I assume you guys couldn't hear anything from the time that we switched slides. So let's go ahead and go over this again. Okay, here we go. All right. Let me see, are we good now? Hello, hello. None, huh? Interesting. It says that I do have audio on our end. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Okay, good. All right, good. So we have it. All right. So let's go back to it. If you guys for any reason can't hear me, let's go over it again. All right. Okay, we're good. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. So let's go back to these layers of leadership that we broke down again. Okay, I'm going to start from the top because I don't think you guys could hear me as soon as we change the slides. So let's jump straight into it. Okay, so we break down layers of leadership into 3 different realms. Okay, and these 3 different realms are really, really important because these ultimately help kind of break up some of the skill sets that we have as people. So let's go over it, right? Physical leadership is, our ability to take action and to be a doer, right? We usually respect those who do take action. Mental leadership is ultimately our intellect, our ability to think and to rationalize and come up with strategies and things like that. And an emotional leadership is ultimately our way of being able to connect to others, to unite people, to be able to feel what other people are feeling. And all of these things we can see represented throughout history with very influential people, right? Like emotional leadership, for example. We look at people like Martin Luther King, right? Who was definitely a person of action, definitely a person of thought, but he also had a power to connect with people who, using emotion, right, and was able to empathize and also control his own feelings, right? We look at mental leadership, people who are innovators, people who think, people who are able to anticipate behaviors, people who are able to make decisions and analyze, risk versus reward. These are all concepts of mental leadership. And then physical leadership is something that's really important and sometimes something that seems to be overlooked, especially when dealing with our dogs. Our dogs are very physical creatures. And so physical creatures, they have a tendency of always assessing our behavior, right? And so if our behavior is static or stagnant or isn't necessarily, if we don't take charge on a regular basis, what tends to happen is our dogs, because dogs learn to respect one another based on the actions that they take, if we don't take physical actions, if we don't, step in front of the distraction, or if we don't, directly communicate to our dogs what we need them to do, like if we don't take charge, what tends to happen is our dogs aren't able to click with us that they need to listen to us or follow our leadership, right? And so these 3 realms are really, really important because this is ultimately the human experience, right? There are some people who are really good at just doing, some people who are really great at thinking, and unfortunately, each of these also have their own issues with them, right? There are some people who they do so much that they don't think first, so they end up doing the wrong thing, right? There are people who think so much that they can actually think themselves out of a good idea, right? And then there are people who emotionally, they can feel and connect and influence others, but sometimes what tends to happen is we also can be very easily controlled by the emotions of others as well and influenced in reverse, right? And so it's really, really important for us, with our dogs, and we're going to stay specifically on dogs because I don't want this to get too philosophical, but when we're looking with our dogs, these bullet points that we wrote down here are ultimately places that we can look at and maybe doing better, with our dogs, okay? We'll break them down real quick. Let's start on the physical leadership. So taking charge is very simple. If I ask my dog to do something and my dog decides to ignore it, you know, as a person who takes physical charge of something, I need to find a way to grab my dog's attention. I need to take some type of charge of the situation. That could be grabbing my dog by the collar. That could be getting in front of my dog. That could be clapping my hands, doing whatever I need to do to motivate the behavior that I actually want to happen, right? Leading by example would be we have to kind of create the state of being that we want our dogs to have, right? So we've all heard this this concept in dog training where people say, you know, you can't act nervous because if you act nervous, it'll go down the leash and the dog will feel your nervousness, right? Which there is validity to it, but ultimately the acting nervous is being indecisive, not having steady movement patterns, you know, actually being tense and perhaps pulling on the leash too much. You know, so leading by example is we have to create the state of being that we want our dogs to have. So that way our dogs can learn to be receptive to our playfulness, to our excitement, to our assertiveness, to our passion, to all of these different things. But we have to physically manifest those intentions, okay? And then consistency in action and reaction. Ultimately, the point of you know, action and reaction is we create kind of this schematic for the dog to live in, okay? This is where the concepts of boundaries and rules and parameters and limits and all of these things kind of exist. And ultimately what we're doing is we are framing, creating a framework for the dog to understand what game they're playing and how to be successful at that game, right? And any game, you know, there is a very clear reward process. There's a very clear list of rules and foul plays that you can have. And ultimately, is we want to teach our dogs by being consistent in our actions and reactions how they should respond, right, consistently. Now, if we're inconsistent in our actions and reactions, well, we just end up confusing the hell out of our dogs. Make sense? Okay. So let's move on to mental leadership a little bit. Anticipate outcomes and prepare for them. I think this is something really, really important. There are so many people that they know that their dogs might respond a certain way, and they might try and create, you know, ways of managing them or preventing them or trying to influence them. And I think the fact that you're thinking ahead is really, really important. And usually where dog trainers can really come in handy is we teach you guys maybe a more effective way or a more efficient way of handling a situation, so that way we can be ready for a behavior, guide it in the right direction, okay? This is a good one, making decisions, right? We have to make very clear, concise decisions. And this is something that I want to be very clear on, is we have to analyze risk and reward because the end goal should always be growth and improvement, right? So in training with dogs, I think it's important that we analyze risk and reward, right? There are some times we might put our dogs in situations that are too high of risk, and then what ends up happening, we end up shooting ourselves in the foot, and then it's very difficult for us to recover from that failure, right? And so when we're making decisions, we want to always advocate for our dogs, right? We want to make sure that we're not putting them in super stressful situations that they may not be ready for, but at the same time, we want to move ahead with techniques and procedures that will keep the dog safe, so that we can lower the risk and that we can maybe repeat over and over and over, so that way our dogs can learn and develop growth and improvement, okay? And then there's this other aspect we talk about, which is persistence and willfulness, okay? That person keeps trying. They make adjustments. They stay focused on their goals, right? Ultimately, this is a big area where I see people lack when it comes to their mental leadership with dogs, okay? So keep trying. You know, I always have this persistence when I train dogs. Let's say I have an aggressive dog or I have a dog who doesn't come. I'm stubborn enough to keep practicing until it clicks, right? So that's, I think, one of the big things, and something that we actually have to guide people through is a technique that shows them the improvement, right? A technique or an approach that shows them, because there's so many different ways to teach a dog to sit or teach a dog to lay down or teach a dog to come. And if you stick to one particular procedure, you're going to see that there's going to be huge improvements on the dog's part, right? Just definitely way better than doing nothing, right? So leadership involves persistence and willfulness, for sure. Okay, very last one, and we'll keep it short so we can move on. I see that there's a couple questions here that need to be discussed. All right, let's go. Emotional leadership, empathetic, where you can connect, right? You have to be able to read our dogs. If we're not, there's been no successful long-term relationship where an individual could not connect with their partner, right? And connecting, I think, is super important because, especially with dogs, they don't have verbal language that we can speak, back and forth with them. So it's really important we learn their body language. It's really important we learn what their body cues are trying to tell us so that way we can maybe make a more appropriate decision that helps our dogs along the way. And then forbearing, I think self-controlled, emotionally expressive. It's important that we control our emotions too. I can't, I have to admit to you guys as a dog trainer, especially when I was a younger dog trainer, control of my emotions was one of the biggest things I had to learn, right? I was naturally attracted to dogs who were aggressive, who had behavioral problems, who had issues who had issues with biting and aggression. And I remember when I was a younger dog trainer, it was really difficult. Can you go back to camera? It was really difficult for me to not take certain things personally, right? And so that's a very important part of the emotional leadership as well. Being able to express, being able to read, and being able to control yourself is going to be really important because sometimes emotions can be very powerful, but also they can be they can kind of give us a handicap as well. And I think a lot of my clients, they lack leadership sometimes because they feel bad about certain things. And it's not necessarily something that the dog is feeling, it's something they are feeling. And so sometimes for us to find success, we have to kind of stay at it, stay persistent, and then we start seeing that the dog adapts, or the dog likes it now, or the dog no longer is thrown off because it's new, it's a new experience, right? And that's ultimately our end goal. All three forms of these leaderships are to create understanding. Understanding of us, understanding of the dog, understanding of what behaviors are acceptable and not acceptable, and this is ultimately the goal, okay? I know we had a question from Don C. Could you read that out for me real quick, Cristiano?
Can you discuss dogs that recognize a primary leader and others in the household that experience aggression?
Yes. So, one more time. Give me the question.
Discuss dogs that recognize the primary leader and others in the household who experience aggression. And then said,
Okay, so describe dogs who are aware of a primary leader, and then the rest of the family members they show aggression towards. This is your question, I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so primary leader. So dogs. It's very easy for dogs to assess like who to. I'm going to curse a little bit because it's YouTube. Who I can fuck with, who I can't fuck with. Right. This is very simple. Right. Kids know who they can fuck with, who they can't fuck with, and it's just a matter of observing again consistent actions and reactions. Right. What tends to happen, in families, we kind of see a lot of different positions develop, right? And we make jokes about it as dog trainers, but, sometimes people might think that they're the dog's mother, right? They feel like a mother. They act the best way that they know a mother's supposed to act to their dogs. But if I were to interview the dog might be like, oh, that lady? Yeah, she's my girlfriend. Duh. Or someone might be like, that's my roommate. Actually, she likes to cook stuff for me, and or he likes to pet me. That's my masseuse, right? So we always make jokes as dog trainers of like we might think our position is one thing, but the dog might think the position is something different. And so there are going to be certain personal characteristics that different individuals have when it comes to, let's say, just being very blunt with the dog. Hey, cut that out. Stop that. Don't do that, right? We not to make too many generalizations, but we tend to see that this is kind of either the male of the household or what we call in behavior the enforcer, right? The enforcer or the guardian of the household, right? So we see that there's a nurturer and there's a guardian, right? The nurturer is usually the one that is really focused on, the making sure that the dog is nurtured pretty much. The dog's comfortable, the dog is loved, the dog has intimate connection, the dog has all these other things. And what tends to happen is the dog is able to perceive that individual a certain way. Anytime I want to feel good, I go to that individual, right? And then you have the guardian or the enforcer, which is the rule keeper. This is the person that's very direct, They usually are the ones that play with dogs or play with the kids, right? They teach dogs adventure. They make the dog slightly uncomfortable in the name of growth, right? And so these are the ones that we usually see in a family dynamic where the guardian might be like, yeah, the dog listens to me just fine. And then all the other nurturing figures in the household might be like, the dog doesn't listen to me in this scenario, and everyone can be very aware that the dog is listening better to the guardian figure. But it's only because we've been able to primarily speak to them in their very primitive language, right? I always kind of look at the guardian figures. We're more, the joke is men are dogs, right? So we speak more on a dog's term. This idea of hierarchy makes more sense. This idea of taking action, taking charge. I always related to like my siblings growing up. When I was a kid, I had 3 other siblings, and I was always on the bottom of the totem pole. Didn't matter. It didn't matter to me, right? And pretty much, boys have a tendency, or the guardian figures, not always boys, guardian figures have a tendency of treating their dogs more as a sibling versus like a baby or like a helpless thing, right? And this is just the nature of perception, right? I hope that answered your question. Did it answer his question? Do you know?
I think it did.
Yeah, so go ahead.
I mean, he had a follow-up after
Yeah, what's the follow-up question?
Can you discuss aggression when touching the dog in a certain area or when correcting a bad behavior?
So if the dog, so can I discuss aggression in a certain, if the dog is touched in a certain area, or correcting bad behaviors? I think in many ways it can be very easy to look at a behavior and be like, yeah, if you don't like it, just correct it. And I would say a high percentage of behaviors, if you consistently correct a behavior, it will eventually phase out and go away, unless there are medical issues, right? Let's say if I'm touching my dog on his back leg, or I touch my dog on the back of his neck, and we see every time I touch it, the dog is snapping at me, right? Always my first thought is going to be, is there physical trauma? Like, could the dog have a slipped disc? Could the dog have a herniated disc? Could the dog have, something dislocated? We just always have to check that off the list, number one. Number two, we have to look at, all right, has the dog suffered trauma here in the past and might be having kind of PTSD from that? Because that is also a possibility. I've met dogs who have crazy PTSD when it comes to the surface of floors, right? It all started, the dog is a puppy running around the house, all of a sudden runs into the open kitchen on tile. The dog just eats it and spins out and slams into the wall. And from that point on, that puppy is scared of the tile floor of the kitchen, right? So we see stuff like this all the time. I think it's hard to give kind of a tutorial on correcting behaviors per se, but I would always want to investigate to see if the reason the dog's being aggressive when you touch him a certain place, is it potential pain? If we check that off the list, if we know it's not pain, if we know if it's only happening to certain people of the household, let's say there's one person that can touch him there and other people that can't touch him there, it is possible that the dog might be more respectful of that individual and less controlling, or they might be scared of that individual and they don't want to challenge or piss that person off, right? So it varies. I wish I knew a little bit about your situation. If you could give me more of a detailed description of what you're going through with your dog, I'm happy to help you virtually like this done. So give me a little bit more detail, and then hopefully I can give you a more accurate answer. Any more questions? Okay, cool. So if there's no more questions, hopefully this dynamic of leadership was kind of broken down for you guys. So I want to leave it to you guys to kind of figure out, all right, where do I lack leadership? Where could I be doing better? Is it in the emotional realms? Is it in the mental realms? Is it in the taking action or the physical realms? And usually we see issues across the board in all three, okay? There kind of comes this confusion sometimes when it comes to the purpose of why we get dogs in the first place. I think what's interesting is because dogs are pack animals, right? If you've had other pets, let's say rabbits, hamsters, mice, snakes, let's say you've had a bunch of other animals before, it's easier to keep some other animals in domestication because they're not as involved in our life as dogs are, right? And so very simply, we just give our dogs food, water, warmth, and shelter, and we give them some love and affection, and then all of a sudden, those dogs, or not those dogs, those animals, the snakes, the bunnies, the rabbits, all that stuff, they thrive, right? They can thrive for 10 years, 15 years, until the day that they die, right? With dogs, very, very different. Very, very different. I want to go over another graphic with you guys, if I can. Those of you guys who may have studied psychology or anthropology, there's something called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to put it up on the screen real quick. Let me make sure that the audio works as well. Let me see. Alrighty, guys, here we go. So we got Maslow's hierarchy of needs here on the screen. Let's see. All right, so we look at the very basic, the bottom two needs, okay, which are the most basic needs of animals. And then we're going to look at layer 3. Now, obviously, this hierarchy of needs was designed. Oh, really? Again? No audio? Yeah, it should be good. Okay, so now that we look at these bottom two layers, basic needs of Maslow. So, sorry, let me recap. This pyramid is designed obviously for human psychology, all right? So I am very aware that we're talking about human psychology, but we're talking it in relation to dogs. Now, why is this important? Because I need to make it make sense to humans, okay? What we see a lot as dog professionals. So when we first get a dog, I know a lot of people who don't get animals simply because they go, I don't have time for it, I can't feed it, I don't have a house with a yard, or I don't have the ability. So that's kind of the first need. People are saying, I lack the ability to give the very first layer of Maslow's hierarchy, right? The physiological needs, food, water, warmth, and rest, okay? Once we kind of make that commitment to get a dog, we tend to see, all right, well, I have a house now, or I have an apartment, I have time, I have the willpower to do so, and then so we also get a dog for other reasons. And that other reason we get dogs is to have an intimate relationship, right? To have a friend, to have a buddy. Maybe we're lonely, maybe we have anxiety, maybe we really just want something that's going to love us unconditionally, right? And these are all very normal reasons why people get dogs. However, because sometimes the third situation, the belongingness and love needs, we tend to see people get dogs because of personal reasons, right? And sometimes selfish reasons, right? I want a dog because I want to feel loved. I want a dog because I need companionship. I want a dog because I need. And the problem with that sometimes becomes is we kind of get confused with what the dog might need, right? And so we check off the box, I can give my dog food, I can give my dog warmth, I can give my dog rest and shelter, but we also forget the second tier, the safety needs, security and safety, okay? And if we look at security and safety, you cannot have true love until you trust something, right? And a lot of the dogs that we see in rescues or in fosters or in, just unhealthy, toxic relationships with people, I would say pretty damn close to 100% of the time, these dogs have insecurities when it comes to their safety and security needs, okay? Because it's interesting, as humans, we don't really understand that how evolved we are sometimes, right? We might look at a dog who's growling and lunging and be like, dude, we live in the suburbs. That other dog is a golden retriever. He's not even growling at you. Why are you lunging at him, right? So it seems almost unprovoked, but in the dog's mind, they might be perceiving danger, right? Because they haven't gone through the extensive amounts of socialization, and they haven't gone through the extensive amounts of desensitization and adaptation to the world that we live in. They didn't have a parent that taught them to control their feelings and taught them context, right? So there's all of these things that we see that sometimes a rescue dog might lack, right? Or a young puppy who hasn't been socialized might lack. And so the big reason for leadership is we actually see that our leadership gives our dogs a sense of safety and security, right? And it's this ultimate task that we're tasked with, that if we could become better leaders, a lot of aggression, a lot of attitude, a lot of these bad behaviors that dogs get euthanized for or given up for, or any of those bad things, we can drop these numbers down significantly, right? And this is the ultimate purpose of this foundation, okay? I hope that was helpful. We got a follow-up question from Don C, or just a little bit more context, so we're gonna go over that a little bit. And then after this, let's go ahead and open it up to some other people's questions. If you guys have any follow-up questions on the material that we're going over, the whole purpose of this is just to open up your guys' minds to things we might be able to do better, right? All right, let's go back to, what did Don C say?
He said that his dog is a foster. We suspect it's related to the previous owner's PTSD and also collar sensitivity. I don't think it's medical.
Okay, and so that's very good. So instead of feeling like we have to correct that situation, give ourselves time, right? Aggressive behaviors, assertive behaviors, we feel like we got to squash them and nip them in the butt, right? Which sometimes if we have, well, it's best if we take our time. It's best if we kind of look at it like in the next couple weeks I want to see progress versus in the next couple days I want to see progress. And the approach that I would take for a dog like that, if you feel that it could be trauma, if you feel that it could be abuse, you know, the process is going to be as follows, okay? We could do short interval touching and rewarding, right? So one thing we want to look at, is your dog taking food from you? If your dog's taking food from you, great, right? If your dog eats out of a bowl, what I would do is I'd actually stop feeding him in his food bowl, and I would play a little game where it's a little massage and a breakfast, massage and some breakfast, massage and some breakfast, right? If your dog does not have a strong appetite to be able to take food, because sometimes dogs are nervous. They go, this is out of the ordinary. I normally don't eat from humans' hands. We want to make that normal first, okay? So if you can get a dog to take treats from you, or his kibble, or his breakfast, or his dinner from you, great. Then what we'll do is we'll start ritualizing a desensitization protocol, right? So let's say the dog's a little weird around his neck, right? So what we can do is we can just grab just touch him a little bit on the neck. Now, if you're scared about him going for your hand, we can use a proxy, right? Like a brush, and brush him on the neck, right? We can use a soft stick, right? And just kind of touch him. Just something soft that doesn't seem threatening, but that could mimic your hand. And we can touch him, good boy, give him some of his food. Do it again, and you're gonna probably do 30, 40 repetitions of 2 to 3 second intervals of touching the dog. Then you'll stop. Then you'll start up again. Touch, 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 feed. Touch, 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 feed. And what happens is if we break this down over a week, I want you to assess your progress from Monday to Monday. Are you able to touch the dog longer? Is the dog looking forward to the event? Is the dog actually changing his perception of the event from being something that pisses him off or makes him feel defensive, or is he actually like leaning into it a little bit, right? So these would be very basic exercises that for sure will make progress. Whether they'll solve your behavior problem 100%, I'd have to actually see and assess the dog myself to see, you know, how much of it is just attitude, how much of it could be potential trauma, how much of it, because, you know, the interesting thing is if it's attitude or trauma, this technique will help either way that I'm giving you. So I would start there and then just follow up with the CANIS Foundation. We're happy to give you guys some more advice. All right? Any more questions? No more questions. Wonderful. Okay. So again, guys, if you guys find value to this, you guys can watch this again later. So it's recording to YouTube Live. You guys can go back to our YouTube channel and you guys can check out you know, the episode again. If you found something interesting, you can watch it again. Or you can share it with your friends. You can share it with your mom, your dad, your cousin who just got a dog. Anything that might be helpful for them. A couple books that I would recommend for you guys. So on my podcast, the Dog Trainers Podcast, feel free to reach out and listen to us. We're on all podcast platforms. But the Dog Trainers Podcast, the point of it is it's a podcast designed for dog trainers or people who are interested in becoming dog trainers. And we're able to interview some of the best dog trainers in the industry. Unfortunately, they don't have television shows, some of the best dog trainers. But people who have, you know, added research, created content that helps kind of move the field along. And there's a gentleman by the name of Sean O'Shea who I didn't really know much about him when I first got to interview him, but my co-host in my podcast was a huge fan for many, many years. I got to interview him, and in preparation for the interview, I got to read 2 of his books. Right, I had to cram 2 of his books in 1 week, and I have to say that his book is a very refreshing look at leadership. It's a very refreshing, poetic way of looking at leadership. And what I liked about his book, I'm used to kind of procedural books. Chapter 1, do this. Chapter 2, do this. Chapter 3, do that. And the cool thing about his books are they're written kind of like coffee table books. You just pick one up, open at any chapter. Each chapter is probably maximum a page long. And you just read the page and you're like, huh, that was really useful. That was really helpful. I'm glad I did that. Right? It's very much kind of like a book of poetry or a book of scripture, if you will. Right? You can go to it and you can just read any chapter and you go, I needed that reminder today. Right? And it's a really cool book. He has 2 books called Love Them by Leading Them, The Good Dog Way. You guys can find them on Amazon. I don't get paid to promote this book. I'm just a really big fan of this book, and I think it's helped a couple of my clients that I've had the privilege of sharing with them, and they've read it and they found value to it. But yeah, I would check it out. He actually came out with volume 2, which I think is better than volume 1 personally. But if you guys need some reminders of leadership, of understanding potentially how we might be doing things wrong or how we could be doing things better with our dogs, I would really promote that book. Right? It's called The Good Dog Way, Love Them by Leading Them, Volume 2. It's also on Audible. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Kindle. But check that book out. I think that would be a really, really fun resource for you guys. Okay? Any questions? No questions. Great, guys. Well, if there's no questions, then I guess we'll go ahead and wrap this up a little bit sooner. Let me know if you guys in the comments, if you guys like these workshops. Ultimately, I really love doing this. I really love helping you guys and seeing how I can add value to you guys as much as possible. If you guys have any ideas or subject ideas of like maybe what we could do a virtual workshop or a Q&A on, please let me know, because I would love to continue doing stuff like this for the foundation. And just let us know. Any ideas that you guys might have or any questions you guys might have, put them out in the comments. And we really appreciate your guys' support. Again, if you guys would like to support us financially, you guys can go down to the descriptions below in the YouTube descriptions, and you can donate via PayPal, you can donate via Venmo, you can donate via GoFundMe as well. So we really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you guys soon, we hope. All right? Thank you again for supporting the CANIS Foundation, and we'll see you guys. Peace. Are we offline?